Karen Reed says she is innocent, but the night officer John Lane was found dead in the snow outside his own home. All signs pointed to her. Was it a tragic act of jealousy, or was Karen framed by the very people sworn to uphold the law? As shocking evidence vanishes and witnesses go silent, this story spirals into a chilling tale of power, betrayal, and a woman trapped in a deadly conspiracy. It all began on a cold February night in the quiet suburb of Crestville, where everything seemed ordinary until a call to emergency services shattered the calm. Karen Reed, a 38-year-old finance manager, was found sitting behind the wheel of her SUV, parked awkwardly in front of her boyfriend's house. The engine was still running, and her hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly. Nearby, the lifeless body of Officer John Lane lay face down in the snow, partially illuminated by the dim glow of a porch light. His injuries were severe, and first responders quickly determined that he was already dead. Police at the scene immediately began piecing together what happened. Karen, who appeared dazed and confused, was taken in for questioning. She reportedly told officers she had come to pick up John after he didn't answer her calls. As officers walked the property, they noticed shards of red plastic in the snow, a broken taillight, which they claimed matched Karen's vehicle. That discovery changed everything. Investigators announced that John had been struck by a car and left to die, and Karen was charged with second-degree murder within hours. The news sent shockwaves through the community. Karen was well known and respected at her firm. Her relationship with John had always seemed stable, even affectionate. They had been together for over a year and were often seen at local events and dinners. Friends and neighbors struggled to understand how Karen could be involved in such a violent crime. According to the initial police report, the motive was simple: jealousy. John had allegedly been texting another woman the night of his death, and investigators theorized that a confrontation turned deadly when Karen lost control. It seemed like an open and shut case, but as the investigation continued, some things didn't add up. Karen's SUV had damage at the back, not the front. There were no tire marks or signs of a struggle near the body. Moreover, Karen had called and texted John several times. That night, behavior that didn't seem to align with someone trying to cover up a killing. Still, prosecutors pressed forward, relying on circumstantial evidence and witness statements from people who attended a party inside John's house that same night. Karen maintained her innocence, claiming she was being framed. But who would want to frame her, and why? As the investigation progressed, the prosecution began assembling what they believed was a compelling narrative. They argued that Karen Reed, driven by emotional instability and betrayal, had run down John Lane in a moment of rage. Their case hinged on a few key points: the broken taillight found near John's body, minor scratches on Karen's SUV, and a witness who claimed she overheard Karen mutter something incriminating during a panicked phone call. It was enough to secure a formal indictment, but behind the scenes, questions were quietly growing. Karen's defense team started pulling records, gathering timelines, and examining forensic reports. What they found didn't support the prosecution's version of events. First, the exact time of death became a serious issue. The coroner's report estimated that John had died around 12:15 a.m., but Karen's phone records placed her miles away at that time, only arriving at the house closer to 1:30 a.m. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station supported her timeline. More troubling was the lack of physical evidence connecting Karen directly to the injuries. There was no blood on or inside her vehicle. Snowfall had covered the lawn shortly after John was found, yet investigators claimed to have found tail light fragments untouched by the weather, and inconsistency that raised doubts about when the evidence had been placed there. Meanwhile, attention shifted to the party happening inside the house earlier that night. It was revealed that several of John's colleagues, all fellow law enforcement officers, had been present. Yet, their accounts of the evening were vague, with key details missing or contradicting each other. One officer couldn't remember what time he left. Another said John had gone outside to take a call but never returned. No one mentioned seeing or hearing anything unusual until police arrived. The house had security cameras, but the hard drive containing the footage was mysteriously damaged the morning after the incident. Karen's attorneys began suggesting that the real story might be far more complicated. They hinted that John had uncovered something sensitive, possibly related to internal affairs at the department, and had confided in Karen about it. If true, it opened the door to a darker motive and a chilling possibility: that John's death was no accident and that Karen was being used as a convenient scapegoat. Public interest in the case exploded, and what once seemed like a tragic domestic dispute now looked like the start of a far-reaching cover-up. As the trial date neared, the cracks in the official story grew deeper. Independent investigators hired by Karen's legal team uncovered alarming details about the night John Lane died. Witnesses who had previously remained silent stepped forward, revealing that the party at John's house had not been the casual get-together it was portrayed to be. In fact, tensions had been high. Several of the off-duty officers present that night had been drinking heavily, and a heated argument had reportedly broken out between John and one of his colleagues. This confrontation, never mentioned in the official reports, was now a central focus for the defense. Forensic specialists also revisited the crime scene and produced reports that raised serious doubts about the sequence of events. Blood found on the walkway did not match the position of John's body, and spatter patterns suggested he may have been moved after being injured. A neighbor who lived across the street told private investigators she saw two men outside the house carrying what looked like a heavy object into the yard in the early morning hours, but her account had never been included in the police reports. When questioned, she revealed she had reported it to the police, only to be told it wasn't relevant to the case. More alarming was the discovery of deleted text messages from John's phone that had been recovered from a cloud backup. In one message sent the night of the incident, John warned a fellow officer to watch your back and referenced what we found. The context was unclear, but the message hinted at an internal problem, possibly corruption, that John had become involved with. Karen's defense team argued that John had stumbled onto something dangerous and had paid the price. They suggested that certain officers at the party had the motive, means, and opportunity to orchestrate his death, and that Karen's arrival later that night had made her the perfect suspect. The prosecution pushed back, dismissing these theories as distractions. But the more they tried to reinforce their original narrative, the more the public began to question it. Media outlets began covering the case with a different tone, one that focused on institutional bias and the blue wall of silence. With each new piece of evidence, Karen's claim of being framed no longer seemed like a desperate excuse, but a chilling possibility that couldn't be ignored. Just when it seemed the case had reached a deadlock, an unexpected discovery changed everything. A former police department IT technician came forward anonymously, revealing that he had seen backup data from the house's security system before it was reported damaged. According to him, the footage from the night of John Lane's death had been reviewed by senior officers before being quietly erased. This revelation sparked outrage and prompted Karen's defense team to file a motion for obstruction of justice. Though the footage could no longer be recovered, the technician's testimony suggested that someone inside the department had deliberately destroyed evidence. Adding to the growing list of inconsistencies, a previously overlooked item was found during a second forensic sweep of Karen's SUV. A smear of blood inside the trunk that didn't match John's DNA. When tested, it turned out to belong to another officer who had been at the party, a man who had since resigned from the force and moved out of state. The defense argued that this strongly indicated tampering with Karen's vehicle after the fact. Their new theory was shocking. John had been injured inside the house, possibly during a physical altercation, and was later placed outside to stage the scene. Karen's vehicle was then manipulated to support the narrative of an emotional hit and run. The courtroom was electric when the defense presented a detailed timeline. They showed that Karen had been at a local bar with friends until nearly 1:15 a.m., verified by security footage and multiple eyewitnesses. They proved that John's time of death was closer to midnight. The prosecution's theory, which relied on Karen acting out of sudden rage, was now implausible based on the updated timeline. The most damning moment came when a forensic pathologist testified that John's head injuries were inconsistent with being hit by a moving vehicle. Instead, they aligned with blunt force trauma, potentially from a hard floor or heavy object, something likely found inside the house. Public opinion shifted rapidly. The idea that Karen had been wrongfully accused gained traction nationwide. Legal analysts debated whether the original investigators had acted out of incompetence or with deliberate intent. Questions surfaced about how many others in the department knew the truth. Karen, once portrayed as a jealous and dangerous woman, was now seen as a victim caught in a tangled web of lies. As closing arguments loomed, it was no longer just a trial about guilt or innocence. It had become a test of how far a system could bend before it broke. The final week of the trial brought a tension that gripped the entire town. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder in the back, and outside, crowds gathered daily, holding signs that ranged from "Justice for John" to "Karen was framed." The closing arguments painted two drastically different pictures. The prosecution clung to its original theory, claiming Karen had motive, means, and opportunity. They insisted that the broken taillight, the emotional turmoil in Karen's relationship with John, and her presence at the scene were enough to convict. They warned the jury not to be distracted by conspiracy theories, but by now, that warning carried less weight than they had hoped. The defense delivered a methodical, almost surgical breakdown of the case. They walked the jury through the timeline, highlighting gaps in the prosecution's narrative. They detailed the manipulated evidence, the missing security footage, the unexplained blood sample, and the officer who had gone silent after resigning. Each piece supported the theory that Karen had arrived at the scene after John was already dead and that someone else, or perhaps several people, had used her to draw attention away from what really happened. The courtroom was silent as the defense reminded the jury of the simple truth: if the investigation had been handled fairly, Karen would never have been charged. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom held its breath as the verdict was read: not guilty. Karen collapsed into her chair, overwhelmed with emotion. Her family wept behind her, and a low murmur spread through the crowd as people processed what had just happened. Outside, reactions were divided. Some still believed she was guilty, but many now saw her as a woman caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, a scapegoat used to protect something bigger. In the weeks that followed, state officials announced a review of the police department's handling of the case. Internal Affairs quietly opened investigations, but no charges were ever filed against any officers. Several retired early or transferred out of state. Karen left Crestville soon after the verdict, seeking peace and anonymity. But the shadows of what happened followed her. Though she had been legally cleared, the mystery of John Lane's death remained unsolved. And in the minds of many, the true story had been buried long before the jury ever reached its decision.